Yehuda after יודוך אחיך. Yehuda is named from Mapam Oida. This time I will think this is the root of Oida, acknowledgement and surrender. In the soul of a Jew, this is the essential identity made of we bow and submit, acknowledging that everything comes from Atmos. Down here in this world, under the limitations of time, it's Apam. Thankfulness at certain times, not constant, because not all moments are equal. But above, in the source of the Neshama, beyond time, entirely the name is Yehuda with Yud, the letter of present tense, constant being, like it's an ongoing state. Yehuda isn't just Oida, it's Yoda, a continuous acknowledgement in Bittul. There's even a hint from the Nekudas in the Chemia where it's written with the Segal to show this nuance. But this state does not appear in a vacuum. Hapam Oida comes after the birth of revelation of Reuven, Shimon, and Levi. They are the qualities that awaken the soul to come to the Seidah. That's why the pasuk says, "יודוך אחיך," your brothers bring you there. Reuven is from Reu Bain, seeing, the ability to behold Alikos, and Ira brings Av, love. Pnei Ari al Yamin. Ari is the same letters as Ira. The camp of Reuven was south, Yamin, hinting to Chesed. Seeing things brings closeness, like it says, seeing brings kira, pleasantness, desire to come close. That's kira Hashem, Vaini issue, the awakening of the beloved relationship. This is the avodah of Psukkah Zibra and Yitzhak, preparing for Shema. Just knowing Hashem is not enough. Knowledge stays hidden, like the Gemara says. Even a Ganav can't call to Hashem in the tunnel, but doesn't change. To fulfill the Yahafta, the revelation must come first. The intellectual awareness, Yediyah, has to turn into the Iyah. This happens by speaking out of Him. His praises, contemplating that His kingship fills all worlds. Alf and the Vaven, yet He is the same one, utterly alone, like before creation. Yachid Melech. And the truth of Yachid is Atmos that is absolutely singular. Echad means drawing down of the Aleph into the Ches, the seven heavens and one earth, and the Dal, the four directions. And the all become nullified and included in the Aleph, in Him. Even the spiritual vitality is drawn up to its source, the Chashem, Gdula, etc. What remains separate, the Baruch Shem Kohen Chus L'Olam Vod, you can have separate worlds. This is only through Malchus, giving space for Amud Pro. That when a person contemplates this deeply, it leads to revealed love, Nichsva V'gam Kol Sanafshei, he fulfills V'hafta Hashem Alekacha, clinging to Ein Sof. Then B'chol Avavcha, both inclinations, means the love of a Baal Tshuva. Tshuva isn't only for someone with literal affairs; it's the soul returning to its source. The Neshama was once completely absorbed in Atmos, and now it's confined in the body under time and place. Tshuva is the narrowness, Mitzrayim, that awakens bitterness over being stuck below. That bitterness creates a deeper love, like the Zayar. The Tshuva draws down light from Ein Sof with stronger force until the body and Nefesh, Habahamas, are transformed. This is Ruvain, the first paragraph, Shema, the running upward. Shimon is the second paragraph. Shemiya, hearing is from a distance. Hashem Shemati Shemecha. Yedesi, fear comes from sensing the infinite gap. Miyala Bahad Hashem, the left side pushes away, creating humility. This evokes Yid. That's why the people stood with Achich by Sinai. Fear placed them back. That's the second parsha. Isamnu, the word of Yira. Reuven is seeing Ava. Shimon is hearing Yira. Both include mixtures, like Kira Hashem B'ani, where seeing includes Gvura, and hearing includes Chesed. They interlock. After Shema comes Levi, Emes, V'yatza, V'nachem, V'nam, V'nasa, V'nachem, V'nam, this is Yelava Ishia, like Yidov connection, the middle line, Kala between Chesed and Gvura. Smell of Haksareshi, V'minita Chabakeni. And this is Torah, Torah that comes down as water descending from on high. Even though on our own, we Yalaba Had Hashem, still Hashem Himself descends through Torah. So Dafka in Torah we can pull Atmos downward, and this draws oneness below, but all this, Reuven, Shimon, and Levi, remains in the category of Mamali Kalam, drawing an icos into the worlds, even the highest level of love, Nixva, and Kulsa. It's still the soul yearning because it feels separate. Yehuda is different. Yehuda is Bittul Ben Sias, complete self-nullification in Sefer Kalam, and beyond Hishtashlos, where everything, spiritual and physical, is equal before him. This is when Esri is silent like the transcendent. Not an emotion of love. Self disappears, like bowing, falling completely before the king. Shtapchos, al-chek of, being nothing. To reach Yehuda, you first need Reuven, Shimon, Levi. Without them, Yehuda would stay makif, hidden, not revealing you. That's why you can't start Shemon Esrei called. Zimre, Shema, and Shemon Esrei in that order. Minachel, Kermalan, Shachar. And Ma'ariv, let me restart again. This is Ratzai, Reuven, Shuv, Shimon, Kidov, Levi, Bittul, Yehuda. Seif Ma'aseh, Machshavat Chila. The end, Bittul, is rooted higher than the beginning. Love, there's the lower Haydah beneath Avon here, and there's the higher Haydah, the Yehuda of Bittul Mamish, like in Leshavisi with the Mamti, the quiet after the fire. And from here, Yehuda Yodcha, the enemy's physical needs, the body of this world must remain Eidif, backside, not Panim. You do them, but like throwing something over the shoulder, externally, not with the inner chayis. Even when you must descend, it's Hashem's hand pulling your soul, you can transform. It stays in Eidif, but becomes included in Yodecha. Yehuda's hand, Hashem's right hand, extended to draw you back. Gashmis are equal. Everything is kula kamekalal chashiv. Kalam mamish, even chachma is asiyah there, so eating can be a keli to other cause. The power to bring all this out in Revelation. Yehuda Ata comes from Ishtachava Lecha B'nei Avicha. His Tachava is Amshacha. The balance is from Esri, draw down this level. B'nei Avicha are the ones who have compassion and kindness, Daka Rachmim, especially Torah. Shma B'nei Musar Avicha. Torah comes from Chachma Av. There's learned Torah and Dugmils Chasad Mar B'nei Avicha. They give the Neshama Kayach to awaken love and awe, and from there reach Yudan and Bittel. That's the order. That's how the order becomes whole. Yodcha יודוך Achicha leads to Yehuda Ata. Bir al Hanal. The tribes represent two modes of movement in Aveda, from below to above and from above to below. First is Amud Nukfa, rising from our efforts upward, and the second is Amud Chura, a flow from above downward. The souls of the tribes originate from Bria, so their natural Aveda is to rise from Bria to Atzilas, but their sherish is from the Yudbe's Gvuli Alachsan, within Zad Atzilas, called Shifta Yudke, which draw downward. So when we awaken from below, so the Lasata, we elicit the response from above, but the tribe of Reuven, a movement from below to above, noticing the king's glory, draws the revelation from above to below. His name hints to Reuven, an Aryeh, strength of seeing. Down here, this means striving to gaze at the king's glory, and it awakens a fierce love, Pnei Ariel Yamin. And from above, it brings the high revelation of sight, the closeness of Ke'ata Yavani Ishi Vimini Techapkeni. So too Shimon from below him, Shemai Tishmu arouses from above. Shama Hashem Kisnu Anochi. Sight is closeness, hearing is distance. Hashem Shemati Shimcha Yeresi, like Habakkuk who was far, trembling. Distance creates a brokenness, a sense of being snua, meaning pushed away. Smeli Tachas Fareshi, that very state awakens the closeness from above, leading to Levi, the connection. These three, Reuven, Shimon, Levi, are the three lines of Chachan, Chachma, Chesed, Netzach, Baga, Bina Gvura, Haid, and Nati, Das, Tferes, Yisaid. But Levi is the center line, the balance. Through these three we reach Yehuda, Yoducha, Achicha, acknowledgement, surrender, Keser of Malchus. Malchus receives everything and has nothing of its own. Yet once she receives, she becomes the true ruler, like a king who gathers wealth from his people and still rules over them. Malchus's root is Keser. To meet in the Chol, to meet and to reveal this requires drawing Keser into Malchus, which happens through the three kavim. Reuven corresponds to the first paragraph, Krishma, associated with the Shem Mab. Shimon to the second Shem Ab. Levi is the middle. Emes V'yatzim Anachan, the 15 above. The channel, the Hechel of Ratzin, higher than the Hechel Ha'ava before Shema. From there we enter the Hechel Kaidish Kadashim Adnei Svasei Tiftach Sibichus Geula Tefillah, and this becomes Yoduch HaChach, acknowledgement, Bittul, and Keser. But Hamad Milada, standing is Tefillah. Kapali's air means Bittul, and silence, Keser, like where silence is the protection of wisdom. Yodcha Ba'edif Evecha, because Malchus has ascents and descents. Hapam Eide, and at night she goes down to purify Bias. It says V'tit and Terev, and the beer is only in the way of Achirai, because the inner, the Pneumius, is included like a nair in front of a torch without any beer. And the idea of Yishtachlecha b'nei Avicha, that they'll bow down to you, is the idea from Shacha, from Abba to Malchus. Abba Yosef Brata, that the father Chachma establishes the daughter. Yeducha Achacha, which is Malchus. Yeducha Achacha is the Amshacha of Keser, which is through the three kavan mentioned before. Whereas B'nei Avicha is the drawing down of Abba, the two kavan, and these are Reuven and Levi. Chachan Chesed, Chachma Chesed, Netzach through Gemilas Chasadim, and Nati, Das, Tferes, Yisaid, through Torah, Nevlis, Ches, Mem, Chachma, Shemaila, I don't know, something like that. Okay. Then Ba'ani is that Bidur and Shuva is one thing, that it's to going down, that you go down from a high place and you need to Trachlalis, you have to bring up to there, it's called Shuva, and so to the Neshama goes down, is Yidu Trachaliyah. This closeness that comes from being poor, being oppressed, which is the bitterness of the soul on its distance until the Bahamas and the Gulf. We'll get the idea of Hapcha, transformation. This is greater, this is like the light that comes from the darkness. There's no for what it says, but in the Pade, Ma Ahu Sit V'chulu. Legefan Biyin, Lebosho, this pasuk speaks about the era of Mashiach. It follows the earlier promise, Yehuda, the kingship will never leave Yehuda until Mashiach arrives and the nations gather to him. Then this blessing will reach its full expression, that binding the donkey to the vine, meaning the spiritual reality of that time. Our sages teach there is no essential difference between this world and the era of Mashiach, except that then the Jewish people will no longer be under the yoke of exile. The era of Mashiach is not the world to come after Tchias Mesim. That future world is where the true reward for mitzvahs is given. The era of Mashiach is still a time of daytime, the time of doing mitzvahs, not the time of receiving the reward. And the full perfection of daytime, the perfection of action, will be in the era of Mashiach. Just as in Gan Eden, Adam's work was la'avdol Hashem, to serve the positive mitzvahs, to guard, which is the negative mitzvahs. That was the ideal state of serving Hashem through action, until sin and mankind was sent away. Later our ancestors entered Eretz Yisrael specifically to fulfill the mitzvahs tied to the land, as so many of them can only be done there. And even that they didn't hold on to forever, and were exiled again. But in the days of Mashiach, soon, in our days, mamish, the service of Hashem will return to perfection. We say every day that then we will bring our offerings again, because the main avodah is in the action of karbanis, which in Golos we cannot perform. So tefillah was established to replace them. But tefillah is still not mamish committed to tzinacha. This is difficult. Isn't tefillah spiritually higher? Tefillah lifts the soul upward, speaking the praises of the Creator, building to vihavta b'chol nafshecha. And karbanis are physical animals, even simple sheep and bulls. Why then is the perfection specifically about karbanis? This is hinted to in the pasuk Gefan Mitzrayim Tasiyah. The Jewish soul is compared to a vine. A vine produces grapes, and through pressing in a wine press comes wine. And the best wine comes from the grapes that grow close to the ground. So too the greatest spiritual wine comes from us when we are low and humble. Our ego crushed like grapes under the feet. From that brokenness comes the revelation of the hidden love inside the heart. Because just as wine is hidden in the grape and revealed through pressing, so the soul's deepest love is revealed through challenge and avodah. There are two types of wine, two types of love for Hashem. There is wine that brings joy, a clean white clarity of holiness, delight in Hashem, where the heart expands. And there is wine that intoxicates, a fiery red wine, the bitterness of the heart when a Jew realizes how far they've fallen. And this pushes them to cry out to Hashem with a powerful longing that overturns darkness to light. Both are holy, both are needed. On Shabbos we say, the Jewish people sanctify Hashem's name. Hashem's essence is utterly holy beyond all holiness. But through mitzvahs, a Jew draws that holiness onward because mitzvahs are his will, higher than Chachma. And the will of Hashem, which is revealed through mitzvahs, is rooted higher than all worlds. Therefore, 1 hour of tshuva and mitzvahs in this world is greater than all the life of the world to come, because in the next world the soul only basks in the light of his name, but through mitzvahs in this world one connects to his essence. The mitzvahs become garments for the soul. Just like it says about Avram, that he was Baba Yamim, with spiritual garments prepared from the mitzvahs he did. But the mitzvahs only create this connection when performed with joy. Joy breaks through all boundaries, reveals the inner light, and washes the spiritual garments clean like clothing laundered in wine. This is the meaning of kibbutz biyin lebusho, that through the wine of a joyful mitzvah observance, the soul's garments become radiant and clean. Even those who have many mitzvahs but remain distant, like pomegranate full of seeds, their garments are still dirty because they lack the inner life of joy in bittul. But through the two wines, the white wine of delight and the red wine of broken-hearted longing, the garments become cleansed inside and out from the body of the soul to the head and face, to the point that the soul can look toward the King's glory. All of this is the avodah now in exile, to refine ourselves and reveal the hidden love. But the completion of this will be in the era of Mashiach, when even physical reality will be elevated, the karbanos themselves will ascend, the animals elevated in holiness, creation revealed in its source, and the prophecy of an enigla k'void Hashem b'ro kabal yachtal will be fulfilled. Godliness revealed openly in the physical. This is the perfection hinted to in the verse legefan Ire, that in the era of Mashiach, when Adam, man, is completed, the entire Jewish people will be elevated to the level of the vine and its wine. The Yud, the point of supernal Chachma, complete bittul, is tied and bound to the vine, drawn down into the soul, transforming the wild city, the untamed human nature, into Ir Hashem, the city of Hashem. The word tzedekah refers to a young, tender vine branch, still soft, early in its growth, producing only a small amount of grapes, so only a small amount of wine comes from it. The term tzedekah refers to the nekuda, the vowel mark shurik, a single point with a line, a specific configuration. Now, the vine, the gefan, is connected with the nekuda sega, 3 points, arranged triangularly. This matches the puzzle, gefan mitzayim tasiyah gemer, kisei Harim Tzila, that you uprooted the vine from Egypt, the mountains were covered in its shade. The word Tzila, shade, is like Hashem Tzilcha, Hashem is your shadow, the hidden aspect of godliness that rises up and covers over the mountains, referring to the Avos, the patriarchs. The Avos themselves are 3 levels, aligned like a sega, 3 points, the perfection of the vine. But Tzedekah, the Shurak, has those same 3 points, but they are not in the same alignment. Instead of being balanced like a triangle, they are positioned one beneath the other, descending. This expresses 2 different spiritual states. When a person feels close to Hashem, uplifted with fiery enthusiasm, his soul energy is aligned like the structure of the segel, 3 points operating in harmony. These are the 3 aspects of avodah, rising upward, drawing downward, in the middle that unite them. This is balance, wholeness, presence. When a person feels distance, not able to come close, not able to stand upright spiritually, yet he acknowledges his distance, admits his lowliness, and bends himself in humility before Hashem, he is like the shuduk, 3 points but descending, one under the next. He cannot stand in full alignment. He feels unworthy to step forward. He remains bowed and bittul, saying, who am I that I should come close? And this humility itself becomes his elevation. Through this humility, the donkey, the asum, which represents the coarse and stubborn part of a person, is transformed into bini, a child. Like it says, meaning the person becomes like a child to Hashem, the way a child is literally the leg of the father, an extension of the father's being. The lowest parts of the self become vessels to reveal the deepest relationship. This transformation from Sereka to Gefin, from Asri to Bini, happens through the cleansing described in the pasuk, Kibis Biyin Lebosho. The word Kibis is past tense, meaning it is already accomplished. The completion of the era of Mashiach, the perfection of the human being, reaching the level of Ire, the tethered bond, and Ben, revealed child, will come as the result of the cleansing that has already been done in Golus, because the exile itself, with all its darkness, pressure, and challenge, has washed us in wine. The wine of exile is the wine of hidden love and joy in mitzvahs, specifically born out of struggle. The fire that comes from is hapcha and shechel and hira, transforming darkness to light. And that transformation is the entire purpose of exile, the preparation for Mashiach. Chachliili, Einayim, Yayin, Leven, Shnayim, Mechalav, eyes reddened from wine and teeth whitened from milk. By wine, it says, the wine that brings joy to God. We need to understand, what does it mean, wine that makes God rejoice? How can something be so powerful? Chazal say, Nichnas Yayin Yotasai, that when wine enters, the hidden emerges. In Torah, there are 2 categories, wine and milk. As it says, the Chushivru v'Ichlu, These correspond to 2 loves, Avas Olam and Avad Abba. Avas Olam is love that comes from contemplation, visible, felt. Avad Abba is a deeper hidden love rooted in the soul's essence. Why is hidden love called Avad Abba? Because Avas Olam is drawn from created worlds. The person reflects how Hashem is constantly renewing existence, Biyin through Malchus, giving life to all worlds, Malaklam and Seviklam, Vatam Chayas Kulam. But this giving of life is not like a soul inside a body. The soul actually enters the body. Hashem is completely beyond. The worlds receive only the radiance of His name. That is why we say, and we ask that the name not remain distant and hidden, but be drawn down into actual revelation that reaches inside the mind and heart. This is why Pesukei Zimra was instituted, to expand on Hashem's greatness until this sense becomes real, not just theoretical. Then one can say Shema Yisrael with depth, Shema meaning understanding, realizing Hashem Echad, that all existence, the 7 heavens, the earth, and the 4 directions are nullified to the Aleph, Aluf Eshel Olam, like the heavens above and below, spiritual gradations all nullified to Him. Then comes Baruch Shem, that from the large Dalet of Echad comes Hamshacha, drawing Hashem's presence into the worlds, Shem Kavod Malchusay, and from there the person reaches Vehafta. Vehafta means Ratzin, that the person's will is transformed, that Hashem is his God, b'chol levavcha, with both inclinations transforming darkness to light, uprooting desire for nonsense, and becoming aligned only with Hashem. That entire process is avas olam. It fits into the human vessel and can be felt. But avad Abba is the essence of the soul. Chelek havaya, mimal mamash. Hashem says, Ani havayalation nisi. He is beyond the worlds entirely. No comparison exists. Even the metaphor of a drop versus the ocean is incomparable, because the drop and the oceans are both water. Hashem is infinitely beyond any comparison. Therefore, this love cannot fit into the soul structure. It remains hidden, revealed only in moments of b'chol meidecha, beyond limits. See Tanya, Perek, Mem Gimel, and Yutas. The difference. Avos Olam can fade when distracted. Avad Abba never stops. Even when the mind wanders, the love remains at a constant imprint. How does this hidden love become revealed? The wine of Torah reveals the secret of the soul. The hidden love breaks into revelation. Chazal say, because the love is called Kitayv, and Kitayv is hidden in Torah. Kitayv leganzai. When the wine of Torah enters, the secret, the hidden love emerges. This is the Yudin, the contractions that limit infinity into creation. The Torah opens them, revealing Hashem's will, and therefore Torah and mitzvahs draw out the soul's will, the hidden love, into speech, action, and behavior. That's why we are asked, because Torah awakens that root. Then one naturally becomes to v'dibarta bam. Now we return to Chakhlili and Ayim. Eyes refer to Einei Tamid El Hashem, the gaze of the soul constant. Einei Hashem El Yirei, of looking at the King's glory, love of the light, a level above both Avos Elam and Avad Abba. This is like Einecha Yeinim, like two doves that gaze at each other and take pleasure. So too a person's heart is fully taken, constant yearning, devekas, fiery love that cannot be contained, only seen and sensed, love of the light. Like the Zayar on Ashivi Einech, eyes flaming with love, tasting the light of Hashem, Tainag El Hashem. This is the level of a Shabbos, Ostasanak El Hashem. So the weekdays of Ida, awakening the loves, so that on Shabbos the light shines on its own. All this comes from wine, the inner Torah, that is Chakhlili, the palate, the Chech, that says li. It becomes mine, internalized step after step, joining ma and ban until the revelation of Shem Ab, the love of the light. Then the Lebven Shnai Mechalav, teeth grind food, making it digestible, able to nourish without chewing. The food passes through without benefit. So too spiritually. One must grind one's thoughts, words, and deeds, introspection, cheshbon nefesh, evaluating, sifting, refining midas, choosing what is holy, discarding what is waste, like the Gemara's term, medaktek by myself. Then the refined food the refined good becomes nourishment for the soul. This leads to milk. Like milk grows in infants' limbs, so too the milk of Torah grows the midas, chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, yisoid, expanding them with gadlus hamichin until the person becomes a new being entirely, changed midas, all aligned to holiness. When we say that the limbs of the soul are the midas, we mean that their primary structure is the emotional faculties, chesed, gvura, teferes, netzach, yisoid. Within them are the intellectual faculties of chacham b'dadas, which sustain and give life to those midas. And each of these three categories of faculties contains within it all the others, which totals 81 inter-included aspects. Then each of these divides into three stages, Reish, Teich, and Seif, the beginning, middle, and end, which brings the total to 243. And the source of their expansion and growth is the drawing down of Chesed, the nurturing force, which brings the structure to 248, Heichasad, corresponding to the 248 spiritual limbs. This is Rachatzes B'chalav, milk washing the midas, turning them white, purified, clarified, elevated. Then Levan Shinayim, teeth whitened, clarity, light in the refinements, until the person can sense holiness like sight, instantly, not with effort, but naturally. This is the union of wine and milk, inner Torah and refining of Avodah, rising to Chakhlili, Li, ascending higher and higher. Bier al Hanal. To understand what was explained above with Chakhlili and Ayim, we begin with the idea that Torah is called both yayin and chalav, wine and milk. As the pasuk says, to explain this, we need to understand two kinds of love for Hashem, Avad Abba and Avos Olam. A love that comes from above, not created by the person, that's Avad Abba. It ignites on its own, a soul burning like a furnace without effort. Avos Olam, love the person reaches through contemplation, meditation, doesn't fall from heaven. You build it through thinking, through understanding. And then there is a third higher love, the greatest of all, called Ava B'tanugim. This is not fire, not yearning, this is delight. Not reaching for Hashem, but basking in Hashem. There are four names, Ab, Sag, Ma, and Ban. The lower name, Ban, is the one that fell in the breaking of the vessels. The name Ma is the one that refines and elevates. First Shem Ban, which is Malchus Datzilis, descends into Biyah to elevate the fallen sparks of Rapachne Tzutzin. After that comes the Shem Ma to refine again, a second refinement. Every night, Malchus Datzilis goes into the worlds of Biyah to elevate sparks. As the Zayar says, Elef Turin Dachla Behema, Rabba Vishasis Loin Bigmia Chad, the great animal, the Behema, with the numerical value of Ban, eats the mountains, meaning it gathers up the sparks to bring them back to holiness. Because when the sparks fell into Biyah, into Klippas Nega, good and evil became mixed. They are not openly godliness anymore, and therefore Malchus Datzilis must extract them and make them godliness again. That is why Shem Ban is called Avos Olam, because it is the love that comes from the world, the love that was hidden before davening. It becomes revealed through davening. It comes from contemplation, from the world, from being moved by creation itself. Like when a person sees a miracle and feels their heart open, you witness something impossible, water turning to fire, or fire turning to water, opposite switching, and you see the fingerprint of the Creator, and that recognition pulls love out of hiding. That is Avos Olam, a love that has a reason. So too above, Shem Ban refines the sparks in Biyah. The love is born from worldliness, from being transformed into godliness, like someone who becomes religious because of a miracle they saw. This is Avos Olam, love that has a cause. But Shem Ma is called Avad Abba because Ma is pure godliness by nature, not holiness that comes from transformation like ban, but holiness that needs no fix. This is why Avad has no opposite. Abba has an opposite. It can disappear. One day you feel inspired, but the next day you're distracted by the world again, because its source is the world. But Avad is the spark of the divine itself. It has no competitor, no other side that can extinguish it. Yet, there is a deeper truth. Even though Ma is higher, in order to elevate Ban, it must dress inside Ban. The higher love must descend into the lower love to refine it. Only then can the sparks be fully lifted. And above both of them is the third love, Ava B'Tanugim, the level of Shem Ab, which never dresses in the other two. Now we can understand how the drawing down of Ava B'Tanugim, Shem Ab, happens in actuality. It begins with when the two loves unite, Avad Abba and Avad Selim, meaning the union of Shem Ma and Shem Ban. When they interlock, not just interact, but to become one system of avodah, then even though Ab is infinitely above them both, it is drawn down. They explain this. Every world, Atzilas, Bri, Yitzir, and Asiya, has 10 spheres, and also worlds and echalas, palaces within it. The 10 spheres of each world are pure godliness. They don't require refinement like the quality of Shem Ma, naturally aligned talikus. The worlds and palaces are not automatically godliness. They need to be purified, clarified, and elevated, like Shem Ban, which deals with the broken pieces of reality, lifting them back. First, Ban ascends, taking the worlds and palaces with it, the raw materials of creation, as an offering upward. It's called man, mayin nukfin, a feminine upward yearning. Then Ma descends like mad, mayin dechurin, a masculine light, to refine again, to give clarity, to make the elevation stick. This is the meaning of the union of dochar v'nukva, of male and female, havaya lekim, the masculine, the feminine, ma and ban, the two shemis of Hashem. The verse says, Zachar nekeva bram v'yavarach eis. Zachar is ma, nekeva is ban. And v'yavarach eisam is the drawing down of Shem Ab, which is the blessing, the overflow, the delight, like a chassan and kala standing under a chuppah. They're not alone. There is the third reality present, the makif, the canopy, the presence that surrounds them and fuses them. Two finite beings stand together and infinity enters. The third presence, the relation of Ab. So too in Avodah, when Ban first refines reality, elevating the raw physical, the chaos, the distractions, and Ma descends and clarifies again, integrating holiness, then Ab shines, because now the vessel is ready, and the infinite does not rest in a place of lack, only in a place of holiness. This is also why Shem Ab is the revelation of tainik pleasure, because its source is an Atika Kadisha. We see a mushal in the soul. The true pleasure breaks out when a person has a new flash of insight, a moment where the mind opens up, and you see a concept from the inside, from the source. That is Shem Ab, pleasure as revelation, and that is why Shem Ab is called Ava B'Tanugim. This explains the pasuk Chakhlili and Miyn. Chazal say, "Kol Cheicha Toyim Eimer Li." The taste buds, when they taste something, they say something refined. They say Li, mine. Why the double language? Because two ascents are happening: the ascent of Shem Ma, Avad Abba, the ascent of Shem Ban, Ava Salem, and they're both meeting in Ab and Atik, Arachanpin, where they become pleasure. Cheicha Toyim, the palate, the tasting faculty, corresponds to Chachma Datzilas. That is why it's called Cheich, because Chachma is the point of tasting truth. It's where the infinite meets the mind. There are four components in Torah: Taimim, Nekudas, Tagan, and Eisius, Tansa, corresponding to the four names of Ab, Sag, Ma, and Ban. Tamim relate to Ab, the pleasure hidden in the flavor of Torah. Just like physical taste, something sweet and delicate, you enjoy it. So too in Chachma, taste is the revelation of Atik itself. The soul is overtaken with delight. This is the secret of Nichas Yayin Yatzasai. When the wine enters the inner dimension of Torah, the concealed secrets, the hidden love emerges. The Avad Abba surfaces and clothes itself inside of Abba Salem, the fire inside the vessel, and the combination calls down Ab. So Chakhlili and Yayin means the redness of the eyes, the passionate fire comes from the wine, because the wine awakens the Say, the union of Ma and Ban, which births Ab. And where is this experienced in life? On Shabbos. Shabbos is Mechem the Abba. It's the revelation of Einik pleasure. Matika Kadisha into Chachma Datzilas. That's why the pasuk says, "V'karas la Shabbos Einik." You must call the pleasure you draw it into Chachma. That is also why Chazal say, "Kol ha'emer v'yechulu b'Shabbos." Not the shutuf l'Hakadosh Baruch Hu v'na'aseh b'reishis. Whoever says v'yechulu on Shabbos becomes a partner to Hashem in the acts of creation. Because on Shabbos the world is not being made; it's being enjoyed. A partner is not the worker; he is the one who shares the profit. And this is the reason that eating on Shabbos is avoided, because the food becomes the medium for Atik to enter Chachma, and from Chachma to enter the soul. But this is conditional. Only one who struggled. On the weekdays, the avodah of Ma inside Ban, the refinement, the discipline, the effort, can taste the eating of Ab on Shabbos. That's Chakhlili and Yayin, because there are two aspects in the eyes: the redness and glow, the fire, the intensity, the yearning, and the whiteness, clarity, peace. the light when the fire has finished its job. The weekday is Shabbos, the weekday is the fire is weekday, the delight is Shabbos. So the idea here is that admimos, that redness, represents the burning excitement. Fiery sparks of longing to look at the glory of the king. Like it says, the eyes are ignited with the shalheven, the chamusa, flames of love. And similarly, the Rab explains that when Zah looks at the mitcha, the arech, the forehead of arech, receives shinai nahedin, 370 lights. And in the face of the kufnun nahedin, the 150 lights, as in the pasuk, ki yikare kan tzipra lefanacha. What this means is that arech anpin, which is keser, is the lowest level of the matzil, the creator. And Zah is the source of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. That's why Zah is called Elam, like the pasuk Elam Chas Libana. Because of this, Zah becomes inflamed, yearning to be included above in the Ein Seif, in Arech Anpin. And this is also the avodah of a person down here, to look at the glory of the king, Einei Tamad al Hashem, that fiery excitement from below to above, and it happens specifically through the eyes. That's the redness in the eyes. It signals that excitement, those sparks of fire. And through the gaze of Zah, with that fiery excitement, and afterward the Sheva flows from Arech Anpin back down to Zah. Like it says, Einei Hashem el Yedeyev, because first there was Einei Tamad al Hashem, the upward striving, like me, Shetarach better Shabbos, like one who puts in the effort first, then receives afterwards. That's how the light and Shefa come from above to below to be Ein Hashem. That's what is meant by Shinai Nahedin, the Kuftan Nahedin, that Zah receives from Arech Anpin, the Shefa from above, the Bechina of Einei Dihu Chivor, the white eye, like the Idr says, V'itaschan Echad Chivra de Eina Tava Chulu. Sight is an external faculty. Unlike the deeper faculties like Chachma or the Midas, for Zah to gaze at the mitzvah of Arech Anpin and afterward receive the revelation of light from there, that can only be through sight, which is from the outside, not entering inward. Then there is Leven Shinayim, the teeth clarified and refined. This is like an ubar, a fetus bebeten ima in the mother, the midas being in the intellect. Seeing with the eyes of the mind what the midas are, inspecting and examining them if there's any mixture in them. That's bebeten ima. And above in Zah, there's tlas klilin, gamer, and tlas chulu. Not sure exactly what that is. And what becomes clarified becomes atzilos and nelikos, and the waste is pushed out. And so it continues upward, level after level, and afterward there is growth through milk after the birth, drawing light and vitalities that the midas shine and become clear. That's leven shinayim, the teeth becoming white from the power of the milk. During the clarification process, they are not yet white because he is still occupied with looking and examining. That is the stage of katlas. But leven shinayim, when the teeth become white and shining, that is after further refinement, bitter achar bitter. And all of this is through pesach hasidacha, the aspect, the bechina of yud gimel tikun tikna, yudin and vaven, hairs and hollow channels, where Abba Chachma nurses from the 8th Mazel Neitzer, which forms letters of Ratzin. Through this, Ratzin is created for every living being. This is through the Torah of Abba, drawing the light of Abba into the soul, and Abba nursing from the 8th Mazel, as mentioned. Then within the person, the Ratzin is revealed that is far higher. The metaphor of Yudin and Vaven, the Yud is the constricted light in the skin of the face, covered, only emerging through a small opening. And the Vav is the drawing down, like here's V'dai le-Maven. Hosfos for Vayechi. ואני נתתי לך שכם אחד על אחיך אשר לקחתי מיד האמורי בחרבי ובקשתי. Uncleus translates, what does that mean, בחרבי ובקשתי? But slicey boosty with my prayers and my requests. Right away there's a question, what does shechem echad actually mean? What's this unique portion? What does it mean, asher lakachti, that Yaakov took it? We don't find anywhere that Yaakov fought battles like that, so what's going on? Then it says, by Yerushalayim, Shamal, Shvat, and Shiftei Ka, Lahidas, the Shemavayit. We need to understand what does Alu, they went up, mean here. And by Yosef it says, Yosef had a Mitzrayim, Yosef was brought down to Mitzrayim. So what's higher? What's lower? How does this all fit? The idea is like this. Imagine someone calls a person a nediv, a generous soul. You're such a giver, you're a kind person, and they call him that in order to awaken that generosity inside. They're not creating something new. They're drawing out what's already hidden in his heart into expression. Even if that person is angry, upset, really not in the mood, still, if someone comes and asks with humility and calls him Rachman, Chastan, a merciful and kind one, the anger can fall away, and instead what gets triggered is compassion. Why? Because kindness is always there in the hidden state. If the potential wasn't there inside to begin with, calling him those names wouldn't do anything, especially when he's in the opposite mood. But since the potential is there, even concealed, the asking and calling awakens it and brings it into reality until even the anger flips over into compassion. This is a mashal, a parable for the midas above. All the spheres, all the holy attributes are called by names, like Lahidus Hashem Avaya, because the Atmas, the essence of Ein Seif, Lavne Kol Ila Midas Iu Klal, is beyond all Midas entirely. His essence is even above Shem Havaya. So how does Havaya become a name of Chesed Rachman? That's through Halas Mayin Nukfin, our upward yearning, through calling him by these names. When we say Baruch Ata Havaya, when we praise and acknowledge that he is merciful and kind, that awakens and an arousal from above. Through that, the light of Chesed from Atzilus becomes drawn down, dressed specifically in the Shem Havaya of Chesed, and then it shines through the Keli of Chesed, and then it gives life to the lower world. Without our calling out, without our lost mind nukfin, the worlds simply don't register. They have no significant klal next to Atzilus. Like the pasuk, Magbila Shavas Mashpila Lidis, from his essence, nothing changes whether the world exists or not. Any violation you see. Think back to the mashal. The hidden kindness in a human heart is higher than the little bit of giving that comes out when someone asks for help. It's above being defined by the act of giving. So certainly above the level where all midas are not yet midas, that hidden level is infinitely beyond the chesed that comes out through our avodah. This is the meaning of Shamal Shvatim. The Hashvatim went up. The tribes were in a chariot to awaken the pnimius of the midas of Atzilus through their lost mind nukvin, their upward yearning. That's why the pasuk says, "Alu," they rose upward, so to speak, from below to above, causing an Isurus D'Leila, drawing the light downward so it can be received in the Kalim. But once that Isurus D'Leila happens, once that light descends, it is actually a huge descent. Like Chazal say, "Makam Gadlusa Shamat Ameti Anvasnusa." In his place of greatness, there you can find his humility, because the gap is infinite beyond the gap is infinite between his essential greatness and how he is called great, when that greatness becomes expressed in the Shem Havaya of Chesed inside Kalim. And this is the meaning of a Yosef Hered Mitzrayim. Yosef was brought down. Yosef represents Tzadik Chai Olman, one who gathers all higher lights. Yosef means Hashem will add again. Like the Medrash in the beginning of Shemais, Yosef Hashem Shein is Yadi, a second arousal, meaning that the awakening of the Midas becomes drawn down into the Kalim of Atzilus, which limit and measure that light. That's Mitzrayim. From the word Mitzara Megvulim, boundaries and limitations, light becomes contracted into vessels of the Midas until it can reach the lower worlds. This is a tremendous descent. So what was an aliyah for the Shvatim, calling Hashem by the name Havaya, awakening from below, that itself becomes the descent of Yosef, who becomes called Sevev and Mamale, different modes of revelation, each a limitation compared to the essence. And now we come to the phrase, "Vani nitati lecha shechem echad." Shechem means shoulder. The shoulder represents the achirayim, the backside, light that is given not face to face, but thrown behind the back, as if someone tosses something over their shoulder. That's why the forces that receive from the back, from achirayim, are called the lekim achedim. They feed off the backside of Shem Lekim. But through Torah and mitzvahs, the true unification happens. Havaya Elikim, Havaya Echad, Ushmai Echad, the upper unity and lower unity, Yichidei Allah and Yichidei Tata, where the inner source of all life becomes revealed. Like it says, Ki imcha mekarchayim be'eichin, are the radiance that used to just hover around as the makif. A surrounding light becomes revealed in a way that we can grasp, and then the ayin, the true nothingness, the essence is the reality, is the real reality, and the yesh, the somethingness, becomes secondary, the opposite of how it looks now. This is Ben Peres, Yosef Ben Peres Al Yayin. Don't trust what the eye sees. The yesh isn't the main thing. What's above comprehension, stima dechol stimin, that's the real truth. In that time, love the Shechem Echad. Hashem will turn the nations in a clear language, purified from the mixture of good and evil that fell in the shattering, and they will serve him Shechem Echad with one shoulder, meaning the externality will be subjugated and become one with the inner truth. It says by Shem and Yafes, Yikhu ha-simla v'yasimu al-shechem shneim v'yelchu achiran. They carry the garments on both of their shoulders and walk backwards to cover their father. This is connected to Azab Echalam Safa Bruda. The nations who will be refined are specifically the descendants of Shem and Yafes, not Cham. The Medrash says that in the 7th millennium, a third of mankind will be lost and 2/3 will remain. The idea is that the Achirayim, the backside, will be purified. Shem and Yafes can be elevated. Cham, rooted in the deepest impurity, cannot be elevated. His tikkun is destruction. Like it says, of the Rishayim, sometimes the arrogance of the Klippa is so thick that the only revelation is its end. La Shmidam Adead. But Shem and Yafes can be refined. They will hide from fear of Hashem, run to caves, meaning their ego collapses and they turn around. That's why by Shem and Yafes it says that they took the garment and went backwards, submitting the external to the internal. Now we return to the phrase Asher Lakachti miyad ha'amedi v'charbi. We must understand What is my sword? Yaakov never fought physical wars. It says, a double-edged sword. Why two edges? Because the nourishment of the external forces comes from two directions. One, when the Yid lowers himself into negative desires, then from above, negative waters are drawn, unholy flow, feeding the klippa from the achadayim, even though Hashem is beyond all worlds. Still, their pull is from the back, because we, by choosing something low, have awakened that flow. Because I'll say in Shabbos 56b, when Shlomo took Pari's daughter, the angel Gabriel planted a reed in the sea, and a sandbar formed, an image of how a tiny action below can set spiritual decline into motion. 2. The second edge is the opposite, gaiva, arrogance. When someone inflates themselves without even doing an avera for taiva, just ego, this also feeds the klippa. In takbir kanesha, they lift themselves up like an eagle, like the wrestling with the angel, vayavik ish imay. Through arrogance alone, they open channels of negative nourishment. Now we go back. Now we get to the root of this arrogance. Where does the chutzpah of the klippa come from? It begins below by us. When a yid, because of physical comfort, wealth, honor, status, his heart becomes lifted up. Even though he knows deep down his lowliness, he still carries himself with pride. Not from reason, not from truth, just a bloated sense of self. From that ego down here, ruach, a spirit down here awakens the spirit above, meaning this physical arrogance stirs up the arrogance of the external forces above. Then the klippa starts to say, I created myself, it becomes brazen. The ego of the other side is empowered. Even chutzpah towards heaven has an effect. Chutzpah, I lo klippa shmaya mahani. They receive extra sustenance from this. This is why the pasuk speaks of a sword with two sharp edges, cheref pefias. One edge cuts what's above them, and the other cuts what's below them. Because there are two kinds of nourishment that feed the chitzonim. From the arrogance and inflation, a receiving from the side of keser, the crown, the high place that falls, nafla teres teshenu, the upper edge of the sword cuts off that channel. Misham eridacha, from there I will bring you down. The other way is from the self. The other side is from the self-indulgence and taivas, chasing unhealthy loves. There, the lower edge of the sword severs that connection as well, removing them and receiving from the side of holiness. Now, where does this double-edged sword come from? How is it formed? The pasuk says, the exalted praise of Hashem is in their throats. From this comes the double-edged sword. Think of how our sword works. It separates the head from the body. It cuts the connection so the body can't receive flow from the brain. Spiritually, this means cutting off the channels through which the chitzonim receive life. In the body, there are three pathways from brain to heart. The kana, the windpipe, brings the moistness from the brain through the lungs into the heart. The nerves descend to give subtle life. The veshet, esophagus, brings food for nourishment. The veins carry the refined essence of the blood from heart to the brain. The veshet is in the middle, between the other two, because food becomes blood. Blood is mixed with water. Some goes up to strengthen the brain, and the watery part returns to strengthen the heart. Everything is interconnected, above to below and below to above. Every organ structure matches its function. This is all a mushal to explain how above there are also three channels of flow to the chitzonim, the backside nourishment. Star hamashkim, like the kana, drawing kindness downward. Sarat habachim, like the heat of taiva, fire rising upward from below, awakening flow to the klippa. Sarat ifim, like the veshet, a mixture of both, speech, expression, the blend of mind and heart. The voice comes from the kana, the breath of the heart mixes into it, and the letters come from the thoughts of the mind. This is amiri. From the word amida, speech, this mixture is exactly why Yosef specifically says, I took it from the Amori. And that is why Yosef hung Sar HaIfim in the interpretation of the dreams, because he includes the two others with him. And now we understand why the Chitzonim are called Kesel, fools. Foolishness is marked by words. Kel Kesel, the voice of a fool. In too many words, sin does not cease. Meaning the flow of the klippa never stops when there is too much empty talk, because speech fuels them. Idle chatter below strengthens their connection above. And from where does all this begin? From machshavas and davening, foreign thoughts, when a person is during Aesri, and these weird combinations of letters and nonsense float in. These are the broken combinations that give the klippa energy. The speech of the fool, the endless words of the Amori come from there. And the opposite is also true. Too much empty speech all day creates these thoughts during davening, because Amori speech is rooted in the blend of mind and heart. So the pasuk says, Hashem Hashem breaks their plans and interrupts these foreign thoughts. Those foreign thoughts. That's asher lakachti miyad hamedi. All the nourishment is taken by the double-edged sword that severs the head from the body. Once the kana is cut, there is no more flow to them. Now, what forges the sword? Praise in the throat, because everything the klippa has is only a copy of holiness. Whatever exists is impurity. In impurity was preceded by its source in kedusha. So just like the three officers exist in klippa, their holy counterpart exists in kedusha. The kana is in holiness is kana chachma, drawing the water of Torah from chachma law. It connects what you learn with your heart, making Torah something you actually live. The same way the physical windpipe connects thought to heart, the spiritual connects Torah to the heart. This is how the sword is made. This is how flow is cut from the other side through exalted praise, davening with remes, lifting your voice and your heart until the channels that used to feed the clipper are shut down. So now the same pattern shows up in davening when the heart actually catches his sense of Seva Kalaman, that level of Elikos that's beyond the Shtachshlos, the level called Remes, lofty godliness, also referred to as Kana. Why? Because the person managed to take a conception that was only in the mind, the idea of Havaya Seva Kalaman, and bring it down into his heart. Like the Pasuk says, the Shavisa El Vayechi, bringing it into the heart from above to below. And like the Zohar says, Neida Basharim, Kel Chad Lafum the Meshar Belibe. It's known in the gates, meaning each person according to what they can measure in their heart. In other words, when the heart actually feels the contemplation, that is what's called Sar HaMashkim B'Kedusha, the cupbearer of holiness. When it brings the wine, the chayas, into the heart, then there's something else, the veins, the fiery pull upward, reverse direction from below to above. This is the level of a Rav Tabachan, translated Rav Kutulya, the chief butcher, meaning the movement is rising, like fire rising opposite to water. This is the fiery enthusiasm, the passionate longing and burning in davening that comes from the heat of the blood, the physical vitality of the body itself rising toward Elikos. And that fire lifts the hashpah from below to above, so the neshama grasps Elikos more powerfully. Just like physical veins carry blood upward, so too the spiritual vein work carries the soul upward. And that's why this level is called Rav Ketulya, the one that slaughters, because its main job is to kill off the taivas of the body. The very blood that once fueled these urges now agrees willingly to rise upward in passion for Hashem. While Saramashkim is more about the experience of contemplation, Rav Ketulya is what actually breaks the body's resistance. And then we have the Sarai from the baker. This is the power of speech. The deeper specifically in Divrei Torah. Torah is called lechem, bread, and bread becomes blood. It becomes the substance of life. That's the meaning of chalti yari. The idea that Yisrael, Mefarnes and Lavim Shabashamayim, through Torah and mitzvahs, we sustain, so to speak, our Father in heaven. So the heart of davening is the root of for the entire day. Because when Torah Hashem actually settles in the heart through the level of Sar HaMashkim, it becomes the root of drawing Elikos downward into the Ramach mitzvahs, the 248 positive mitzvahs, and through Sar Tabachim, the fiery enthusiasm the person accomplishes, Sur Midah, staying away from the Shasa, Loisza, the 365 prohibitions all day. In other words, three forces in the soul. Sar HaMashkim, contemplation settling in the heart, draw godliness down, source of mitzvah. Sar Tabachim, Rav Ketulya, fiery longing, slaughtering the animalistic urges, power of Loisza. Saraifim, speech of Torah, making the Elikos digestible, part of the blood, and life itself. This is the Avodah structure rooted in davening that energizes the whole day. These then are the two mouths of the sword, used lases nakam going to exact retribution from these nations, because when these three officers of holiness are strengthened from the inner level of Chachma, Vatzilos to Star HaMashkim, drawing from Chachma, then excess flow no longer gets drawn into the Eiruf of Keser through the three officers of Pari. On the contrary, the evil is refined, transformed into good, and Yispardu Kol Poiliavim, from the Remus Kale in the throat of holiness itself becomes a double-edged sword against the three officers of Pari, separating them with the upper mouth through the mitzvahs asay, and with the lower mouth through the loisaseh, as explained above. And this is the meaning of the Yosef had a mitzrayim, the higher Yosef, the level called the Remus Kale, is brought down into the throat into the constriction, meitzar of holiness, in order to refine and sever the nourishment of Pari, who receives this through his three officers. At first, Yosef is sold as a slave, specifically to Tzar Tabachim, and since Yosef's Merkava was extremely lofty, rooted in Atzilus itself, he was able to refine the level of Acharayim of the supernal Eidif and Atzilus. Therefore, it says, Vani Nasati Lecha Shechem Echad Al Achacha. Shechem means the backside, the Acharayim, and the backside that Yosef refined became the root and source for the refinement of the tribes below in Bria, Yetzirah, and Asiyah. This is the meaning of Al Achacha, and this is because Asher Lakachti Betzlusi, through my prayer, which is Charbi, my sword, the sword of Hashem with two mouths, through Remis Kel Begreinim, as explained earlier. And since Gufa Ubris Chashev Chad, the body and the covenant are considered one, therefore through Yaakov's prayer, this was automatically strength and power granted to Yosef. There was automatically strength and power granted to Yosef to accomplish all of this. Now we understand the Kashti Ubosi, but Bekashti means request, but it also refers literally to a bow, keshet, and this corresponds to the request in Shemini Esrei. And Becharbi refers to Krishma, because the 248 words of Krishma are called Ramcha V'charba, a spear and a sword, take from the hand of the Amory, Likewise, the supernal speech of the VayTorah stands in opposition to the Dibur of the Amory, which is the speech of Klippa. And about this it says, because Hu Ohr Vayechi. We need to understand why this explains the nullification of the multitude of thoughts. The phrase Rabbas Machshavas implies that the problem lies specifically in multiplicity, many combinations, rather than a single thought. And the explanation is known. The proliferation of the words of Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya come from the many different combinations of the supernal letters, which are called Kalim. Before this descent into many combinations, there was only one thought, a single unified combination, like a person grasping something with one encompassing thought. When he begins to analyze details, many combinations form in his mind. Because of the multiplication of combinations in the supernal letters, the flow descends further and further until there is even grasp and nourishment for the external forces. But when Hashem says Vayechi with a single thought, as before, contraction, this breaks the counsel of the nations and nullifies the thoughts of these people. Atzas Hashem Hisakim refers to Knesset Yisrael, the inner level of the letters, while the thoughts of the nations collapse. This is why through the 248 words of Krishma, which he didn't unify every day, and through their divrei Torah, they established the inner word of Hashem forever, and the Echaraim of the Amory are nullified and dispersed. This is Becharbi, the sword of Krishma and Torah, standing against the Amory. However, to subdue clippers that exist in a deeply concealed state, which have not yet emerged into revealed speech, the sword alone does not suffice. A sword can only kill what is close, not what is distant and hidden. For that, the bow is needed to shoot an arrow far away and destroy what is distant. The drawing of the bow increases the force of the arrow so it can reach further. All of this is a mashal for the difference between B'tzloisi prayer as cleaving and closeness to Hashem through mysterious Nevishin, Krishma, and Shemoneh Esrei, and Bavusi, the requests in Shemoneh Esrei, which are far higher, because through request and supplication, a person first comes to extreme lowliness and humility, and the greater the humility and submission he shows, the more he awakens Rachmim Rabim, the source of all supernal encompassing lights, before which all darkness is pushed aside. Even the encompassing forces of the clippers are nullified. The intensity of the awakening of compassion depends entirely on the degree of smallness and humility shown in the request. This is like drawing the bow further and further. The more it is drawn, the farther the arrow flies, until even the most hidden and concealed levels of klippa, called chayshach, anan, varafel, are completely destroyed. To understand the root of all this, we must first understand the root of Yosef and the tribes. In the writings of the Arizal, it is explained that the tribes are from the level of Atzilus as it shines into Bria, in the Heichal Kodesh Kodashim, and they are called the lower Merkava. This is what the Zohar means by the 12 oxen upon which the sea stands, meaning that Malchus of Atzilus, called Yam Elyon, rest upon them. These correspond to the 4 banners. But Yosef was from Atzilus itself, and the body of the tree, the level of Yesod, and he was the upper Merkava for the inner aspect of the Midas. Therefore he says, Hashem atachas elikim ani. Now, we need to understand, why didn't they recognize him according to his true lofty level? Since Yosef was a Merkava, how did they consider him so far beneath them? The explanation is this. The concept of the Shvatim comes from the word Hamshacha, drawing downward, like Chechva Deshavet, a shooting star, meaning something that is drawn from a high place down to a lower one. It's like branches that extend from a tree. A branch isn't considered the actual body of the tree itself. It is a small extension that stretches outward and downward, far from the trunk, with its root drawing nourishment from the body of the tree, but its end descending all the way down to the earth. The same is true of a shooting star. It descends and distances itself. So too, as a mashal, we can understand that the root of the souls of the Shvatim is indeed in Atzilus itself, which is called the Ilan. But they are like the branches that extend downward, meaning their function is to illuminate Bria. This is the meaning of Yud Beis Bakarish Heim Emed Aleim, the 12 oxen upon which the sea stands. That is, the illuminations of Atzilus, as they are joined with Bria, are called the lower Merkava, upon which Malchus of Atzilus itself stands. And this is the idea of the integration of Adonai within Havaya. When creation nullifies itself from its own limited existence and becomes a Merkava, like the branches relative to the body of the tree, then this is the integration of Adonai into Havaya, meaning the illumination of Atzilus within the Heichal Kodesh Kodashim as it is known. And this is the meaning of Shamal Shvatim, that the tribes went up. The Shvatim are those branches we spoke about earlier. They ascend upward toward Gufa De'ulna, the body of the tree, in order to awaken the Shem Havaya there. For them, this is a tremendous elevation, because there is no comparison at all between the body of the tree and its small branches. But by Yosef it says, Yosef Hayded, Yosef was brought down, because the root of Yosef is from the level of Yesod of Adam Kadman, as will be explained, which is from the light of the Matzil within Atzilus itself. This is called the Gufa Dilana, and Yosef is called Yosef because Yosef Hashem Shenis Yadeh. Hashem will add again his hand, so relative to the level of the Matzil, for Yosef to be called by the name Havaya is actually a great descent for him, as will be explained, and this is why they did not recognize him at all, because there is no comparison between them whatsoever. What is an ascent for them is a descent for him. Now, This difference between Yosef and the Shvatim reaches all the way to the highest levels, specifically the distinction between Ma and Ban, which exists within every part of. It is known that from Malchus of Adam Kadmon came the root of the Shvira, the shattering of the 7 kings. They are called kings, as it says, Vayimlech, Bela, and so on. Their root is from Malchus. The 8th king, however, Hadar, did not die because he was above the 7 kings of Tayu. His root was from the Yesod of Adam Kadmon, which is called Hidra de Gufa, above the source of the shattering. Therefore, from him comes the tikkun and the refinement. This is from the new Shema, which comes, and this is from the new Shema, which comes from the Metzach of Adam Kadmon, as is known. And the level of Yosef corresponds to this Hadar. Yosef was YeחיTorah, beautiful in form, as it is known. But the level of the Shvatim correspond to the 7 kings of Ban of Adam Kadmon. To understand what these kings of Ban of Adam Kadmon are and what Hadar is, the one who refines, we must first introduce a foundational principle. The essential Ein Sof, blessed be He, cannot truly be called by any name at all, not even wise or kind, or even said to have will in his essence, because he is utterly simple, absolute simplicity. Will and wisdom, as we know them in a human being, are composite. Therefore, we cannot say that the relationship of the will and wisdom of Atzilus to the essence of Ein Sof is like a flame bound to a coal, because a flame exists even if concealed within the coal, but within the essence of Ein Sof, will does not exist even in concealment, since he is absolute simplicity. For this reason, his will is not compared to human will, and this is what it means when it says, knowledge would imply existence even in concealment, but here that is not the case. Now, what is brought in the pardish regarding the 10 spheres being concealed within the essence is not meant in that way at all. Rather, it is only in the sense of calling a name. This is why the Zohar says that all the lights that are emanated from the essence are merely Rosh Shmei, the secret of his name. And likewise, in Eitz Chaim, it is explained that all emanations come only through the name, such as Ab, Sag, and so on. So how can we call the essential Ein Sof by the name wise, for example? This can be understood through a mashal from calling a person wise, even though the mashal is not fully comparable. Since in a human being wisdom exists in potential, still there is a similarity in one respect. When someone is called wise, this awakens his latent wisdom and brings it into revelation. Before he was called wise, he himself may not have been aware of his wisdom, but the calling awakens what was hidden, so that now it is as though he has become wise through that calling. So too above, through the calling of a name, the essence becomes a source that emanates the light of wisdom, and through calling him chesed, the essence is awakened to become the source of chesed, and this applies to all the details of the emanated light. They are all his names, meaning that prior to the calling he was absolute simplicity with no existence at all, even in concealment of being a source for emanated lights. The idea of concealment comes only through the calling and through the halos miyn nukvin. Just as revelation from concealment is brought about by halos miyn nukvin, so too the concealment itself is formed at that moment from the simple essence. This is exactly like a person's name. Before he is called by his name does not really exist within him, even in concealment, unlike wisdom or will. When he is called, he turns toward the caller. So too, in this mashal, the essence turns, so to speak, to be called Rav Chesed and like. And even in concealment, the essence is now called by that name. Thus it becomes clear that the idea of awakening what is concealed below in a person is the parallel above to what is meant by the 10 concealed spheres. With this, we can understand the concept of Malchus of Adam Kadmon, which is the root of the 7 kings. The explanation is that the idea of calling a name, since it is the lowest level of all the levels of the essence, is therefore called Malchus, because the attribute of Malchus is revelation and outward expression alone, as is known. This is the meaning of Malchus of Adam Kadmon. For Adam Kadmon, in his essence, is the primordial level of the matzil within the essence of Ein Sof. And the fact that he can be called by a name in relation to the emanated beings, such as wise or kind, with Chachma Yediyah, this comes only from Malchus of Adam Kadmon, which is his name, and not from his essence, as explained earlier. And from the general concept of his name emerged the particular names of the 7 kings, which are the 7 meters concealed within the matzil. This is the level of Shemban of Adam Kadmon, which is the root of the Shvatim below in Malchus of Atzilus, as it shines downward into the Heichal Kodesh Kodashim, as explained earlier. However, Hadar is the illumination of the essence of Adam Kadmon from the level of Yesod, which is above the level of name altogether. Therefore, he is above the concept of shattering, because the shattering only occurred in the letters themselves, as will be explained. For this reason, Hadar is the one who refines them through the new Shema, which emerges from the Metzach of Adam Kadmon, as explained elsewhere at length. Now we can understand the pasuk "Va'ani nitati l'chashecha mechad al achicha." The root of this matter is that the refinement of the shvatim malumim comes from Shem Ban, as it is in Bria Yitzir and Asiya, transforming evil into good. This is called Shechem, the level of Achirayim, but Yosef was refining at a higher level within Atzilus itself, from the shoulders of Arachanpin, which are the concealment of Arachanpin, which is called Pare, which are the Achirayim of Arachanpin, which is called Pare. The flow was redirected so that it would go from the inner aspect of Arachanpin to Chachma and Bina. This is Sar HaMashkim, Kane Chachma, and not toward the Achirayim of Arachanpin. This is the meaning of Shechem Echad. To explain this, we first need to understand what Achirayim of Arachanpin means. It is known and explained elsewhere regarding Shimamas Biyadayim to Tapes that during sleep the Meichem withdraw completely. Therefore, even a fly walks across a person's face, he does not feel it. The explanation is that when a person is deeply absorbed within himself, nothing opposite him takes up any space in his awareness. As we see plainly, when someone is deeply immersed in a concept, he does not notice another person speaking in opposition to him. But when the will descends and contracts into intellect, although this is a great contraction, it has a distinct advantage. Now the opposite occurs. Even the slightest opposition is felt sharply, because once the will is narrowed into reasoning and explanation, the person cannot tolerate opposition to his will and pushes it away entirely. That is why when a person awakens from sleep, he suddenly feels the fly. All this is a mashal to understand above the concept of Achirayim of Arachanpin. Arachanpin is the will itself, encompassing all particular revelations of will. The Achirayim of Arachanpin, as explained in the Siddur of Adam Hayinu, refers to a state where the inner aspect of Arachanpin does not shine. When a will is revealed, the inner aspect of Arachanpin shines within it, just as we see that the inner soul is bound up with a person's desire and longing. But in something a person does not want, there is no inner illumination of Arachanpin at all. Only a minimal glow from the Achirayim, like something thrown over one's shoulder. This is what is called the Achirayim of Arachanpin, and since the essence of will is extremely lofty, far above intellect, it is not constricted like intellect, but rather expansive without limit. Therefore, even something that opposes the will can receive a great deal of life force as long as the will has not yet been constricted into intellect. This is the meaning of Marach Apayim, Marach Afl Rishaim, that he is slow to anger even toward the wicked. Like the statement of Chazal, the explanation is that because the power of will is so immensely expansive, it also casts a great deal of flow behind the shoulders. A level of influence that they would never receive according to Chachma. This is the idea of Pare, the supernal Eidif, which receives nourishment from the Achirayim of Arachanpin. This is especially so when he is exalted and elevated within his essence, meaning that he withdraws from illuminating downward, as explained in the Pardes under the entry Aleph of Yud. This state is therefore compared to sleep, which is the mashal below in a person. When someone is deeply absorbed in the very essence of will, everything else becomes insignificant. He does not feel opposition to the revelation of his will. In that state, even opposing forces can receive abundant flow. This was the exile of Egypt. The Yosef had Mitzrayim. Yosef is Yisoid of Adam Kadmon, which shines into Galgalta of Arachanpin, the level called Bal Hadatzin. In a state like sleep, the Eidif, which is called Mitzrayim, receives from Yisoid of Adam Kadmon. That Yosef was brought down so far was precisely because of the intensity of exaltation in the essence itself, just as explained earlier with Shimamas Biyadayim to Tapes. This is also the reason that ministers of the nations receive nourishment, because the exaltation of the essence itself, as explained elsewhere. This is the meaning of Avadim Yinu Lapare. Zeiranpin was in a state of Ibor within Bina, which is the meaning of Atzrayim Meitzar Mi, and the entire essence of the Exodus was that the arms of Arachanpin spread outward, as explained in the Kavanas of Pesach. The explanation is like this: in the Mashal below, when a person emerges from total absorption in the essence of will and comes into the revealed will of the arms, meaning Chesed and Gvura, right and left, according to Chachma and Bina, so to above, the will descends and clothes itself in Chachma and Bina, and because of this, the will now takes up space, so to speak, and can no longer tolerate opposition. This was Yetzias Mitzrayim, the refinement of the flow from the Achirayim of Arachanpin, as it says, the flow no longer goes beyond the shoulders of Arachanpin, but rather into the inner dimension. This is Torah and mitzvahs, which are the revealed will of Hashem as it is known. And without the Exodus, there could not have been Matan Torah, because as long as the arms had not yet been spread outward, the will remained elevated in the essence and could not yet contract into Torah. This is like the mashal below, sleep, which is the withdrawal of the meichin until the level of yichida of the soul itself. This was the cause of Pari's nourishment, as explained. But after the exit of the constriction and the earth, there is room for Torah and mitzvahs. And beyond the fact that the flow which had been in the Achirayim returned to the inner dimension, there was an additional effect of the Exodus, even when the flow now enters Chachma, although Chachma is in a greater contraction than the pre-intellectual level, it now shines with far more of the inner aspect of Arachanpin than it did originally, even though previously he was more elevated in his essence. As it says, Yar Hashem panav elecha, Hashem will shine his face toward you, and this took place specifically at Matan Torah, as is known. The reason is that although intellect limits the will, because the very nature of intellect is constriction, nevertheless, from the side of the essence of will that is within it, there is a great advantage for when the will is revealed. This is the inner essence of the power of will itself, only that it is descended and become revealed. Not seifam b'tchilasan, and in its root, this is far more elevated within the essence than when the will is merely exalted in essence and does not yet want anything at all. So, too, we can understand, by way of analogy, the mitzvahs are revelations of will in our Chanpin, and although they are drawn down and constricted according to Chachma Bina, and from there extended into the Torah as we have it before us, nevertheless, the root is from the inner aspect of the Galgalta of our Chanpin, as is known regarding the Archin into 13 white hairs. Therefore, even though they descend through contraction, the inner illumination within them is far more elevated than the Acharayim of our Chanpin. This is the meaning of Yara Shampana, the inner aspect of Arachanpin, as is known, shining with an added illumination from the essence of Adam Kadmon, when it descends and contracts into Torah Mitzvahs, as explained earlier. So we find that the descent from absorption in the essence accomplished two things at once. First, the excess flow that had been going to the Acharayim of Arachanpin was drawn back, as explained earlier. And second, a more inner illumination was brought into the inner dimension of Arachanpin. Both of these occurred together, as explained. This is the meaning of Ani Nitati Shechem Echad Arachacha. The refinement of the Shvatim was from the 288 sparks, and it took place at the level of the shoulders, the Shechem and Kasif of Arachanpin of Bria, as explained earlier. Their root was only from Malchus of Atzilus. And even at the highest levels, their refinement reaches only the level of Shem Ban of Adam Kadmon, from which the Acharayim of Arachanpin originate. But how can something refine itself? One who is higher than both can refine them. It is known that since evil receives its vitality from good, how can it be separated through Malchus, which gives life to everything? And similarly, in Shem Ban of Adam Kadmon, which is the level of name and Malchus, as explained, from which Acharayim also extend, as with Pari of Arachanpin, how can it refine itself? This is the meaning of they were binding sheaves in the field, transforming evil into good, until the root of their root, even in the 7 kings of Ban of Adam Kadmon. But the refinement of Yosef was far more elevated, because one who is very high, rooted in the essence, is the true refiner at the deepest root, to the point that the flow does not descend at all to one who is unfit, and no later refinement is needed. So too here, Yesod of Adam Kadmon, which is the essence of Adam Kadmon, above the level of name, has the ability to illuminate from the essence into the inner dimension of Arachanpin in such a way that from the outset the flow does not descend to Pare at all, certainly not the one who has already received. And also the second effect mentioned earlier, that there be an additional inner illumination in our Chanpin so that Torah mitzvahs can exist. This too comes primarily from the level of Hadar, which is Yosef, Yesod of Adam Kadmon. This is through the new Shem Ma from the Metzach of Adam Kadmon, which comes the primary illumination of the force of our Chanpin, as explained elsewhere. This seen in Kama Alumasi, from that Yosef Sheaf arose. His refinement was from the level of essence itself. Therefore, their sheaves bow to his sheaf, like a refinement that comes after refinement, as explained elsewhere. This is Shechem Echad, that the level of shoulder and Acharayim is included within true unity from the side of essence. Now we can understand that the root of this is the officers of Pari. The Edif of Arachanpin are Sara Mashkim, Sara Tabachim, and Sara Ha'ifim, corresponding to the Kanaveshet and veins. Yosef was sold as a slave into exile in order to refine refinements from Pari. And just as Yosef interpreted their dreams, so it happened. Yosef decreed in his interpretation that Sarah Ifim be hanged, and he was hanged. And Sarah Mashkem, Yosef elevated in his interpretation, until Yosef himself was elevated to kingship and refined from Egypt and from Pari's officers all the good that was hidden in them. And all of this was only a preparation so that Torah and mitzvahs could later be given. This is why Sefer Bereshit preceded Matan Torah in Sefer Shmos. Now, to explain these ideas and to understand the concept of the sword with 2 mouths, which corresponds to the 2 Hays, Chesed and Gvura, the 248 positive mitzvahs and the 365 prohibitions which cut off the nourishment to the three officers of power I mentioned earlier, we must first understand the three officers as they exist in Kedusha. We see that the kana connects the brain to the heart. The heart immediately feels what the mind thinks, and this can only be because the nerves of the brain are connected to the heart. This connection is through the kana. In addition, the kana channels the moisture of the brain down to the heart, since the lungs cool the fiery heat of the heart, as explained in medical writings. We also see the concept of the breath of the heart, from which the voice is sent upwards through the kana, and likewise from above to below, the inner voice is drawn from the brain down into the heart through the kana. So it is clear that the kana is what connects the brain and the heart. However, all the forms of flow that pass through the kana are from the side of chesed, such as the moisture of the brain, and likewise intellectual understanding that becomes grasped in the heart and felt emotionally. This too is drawn through the kana, and the voice as well. Therefore, it is called salamashkim, the one who pours and distributes chesed. The veins, on the other hand, draw from below to above, from the heart to the brain. That is, the refined essence of vitality that comes from the select blood in the heart is sent upward through the veins to the brain to enliven it and strengthen it. This is a flow of gvura, because the heart is filled with gvura, fiery passion, burning desire, intense emotion. Now there are two brains, the brain of chachma and the brain of bina. Chachma is from chesed, and bina from gvura, as is known. The kana receives the chesed flow from the moisture of the brain and from the moisture of the brain of chachma, and brings it into the heart to cool it. And the gvura within the heart is brought upward through the veins to the brain of bina. Because of this, the emotional enthusiasm in the heart becomes specifically through contemplation, since they are close and connected through the veins. This is why it is called sar hatabachim, because its root is in the blood of the body, and when that blood is refined in the brain and becomes vitality for the intellect, it is called sar hatabachim. The veshet, the esophagus, is the intermediary between them. Its function is to bring food into the body. It includes both chesed and gvura, because the food is eventually transformed into blood in the veins, and as it is known that bread corresponds to chachma, until you taste the tam dog. And thus the veshet is connected to both brains, chachma and bina. That is why it is called sar ha'ifim, the baker, meaning that chachma is baked by the fire of gvura and becomes a synthesis of both. All of this is a mashal for these three officers in divine holiness, and we can understand them from what we see in actual avodas Hashem within the divine spark. First, the voice of the kana in Torah. About this it says, Kaneh Chachma, meaning when a person grasps something in the mind of Chachma, wisdom within Torah, and he delves into it with the power of intellectual analysis in his mind, even before he brings it into speech, there was already a drawing down and flow of the moisture of the Chachma of Torah into his mind at that moment. This is called Kaneh Chachma. It is analogous to the physical kana that channels drink and moisture from the brain, as explained earlier. So too, when one draws from the Chachma of Torah into his mind, this is a spiritual kana, and there is another function of the spiritual kana as well, bringing understanding into the heart. That is, in tefillah, when a person contemplates divine wisdom, how kula kamei kala chashiv, how Hashem is saving them amali, and this divine understanding becomes grasped in the heart, meaning that the heart actually feels the understanding as it truly is. This too is from the level of the spiritual kana, drawing down the moisture, as explained. Now, the voice that comes from the breath of the heart up into the kana through spoken letters shows the letters of speech are the very matter of halacha itself, which is called lechem, as it says, lechu lachmu belachmi. Wheat corresponds to the 22 letters, as it is known, and the voice of speech is what bakes the bread of Torah. This is because it includes both chesed and gvura from the kana and the veshet, salamashkim and sar hatabachim. From the enthusiasm in tefillah that comes from bina, the deep internalization, this is the kana of bina, which corresponds to the veins, as explained earlier, and the breath of the voice from the heart includes both, as explained. This is tara'ifim. And from the enthusiasm, which is an elevation of miyn nukfen, there comes additional strengthening of the meichin. This is through sar hatabachim, which are the veins, as explained. So too we can understand the divine holiness. These three officers, salamashkim corresponds to the chachma and chachma law nafkas, Torah emerging from supernal chachma. This is the drawing down of chasadim through the 248 positive mitzvahs, just as water naturally flows from a higher place to a lower place, so too the descent of supernal chachma from arachanpin gives rise to the wisdom of Torah in the 248 mitzvahs asay, which are divine flows from above to below. The veins correspond to the 365 negative commandments, which prevent flow to the external forces, such as prohibition against eating forbidden fats and blood, as is known. These are the 365 sinews which descend from the mind of bina of arachanpin, and sar eifim refers to the letters of chachma of atzilus called lechem, which through supernal speech are baked. These three forms of action are all required. Through sar hamashkim of holiness, the meichin of chesed are drawn down. Through sar tabachim, there is the elevation of miyn nukfen. Through the nature of fire to rise up, like the nature of fire to rise upward, forming returning light from below to above to strengthen the meichin. Because of this, the sinews descend into the heart as gvura to enliven it. For the primary vitality comes specifically from gvura, as explained elsewhere. And through the baking, all of this is completed, since it serves as the intermediary, as explained. This is the meaning of Reim Miskel B'Greinim. The throat includes the kana, the veshet, and the veins, the three officers of holiness described above. And Reim Miskel refers to the inner illustration of Yarish and Panav into the two Meichen of Arach Anpin, which are called Kel. This is through the two Mazalos of Arach Anpin, Neitzer and Nake, which are in the throat of Arach Anpin. And just as to the kana, the moisture is drawn downward, so too in the mazel of nature there is the level of kana chachma within the reim miskel relative to the chachma of Adam Kadmon, as explained earlier. This is the meaning of the Yosef had Mitzrayim. Yosef, who was the level of Yesod of Adam Kadmon, descended all the way to the throat of Arachanpin of the side of Klippa, which is Pari, the supernal Eidif. These are the three officers of Pari, but when Yosef was elevated, he refined and severed the nourishment of these three officers of Pari from the Eidif, so that they can no longer draw flow from there. This was because Reim Miskel was drawn into the throat through the three officers of holiness. Through this, there was a double-edged sword that separated the nourishment of the three officers of Pari, refining the Acharayim of Harachanpin, as explained earlier. This is the meaning of Pephias, two mouths corresponding to the two Hays, Chesed and Gvura, as explained above. There were two processes. First, the exit from the constriction, returning the flow that had already been received. And second, the additional inner illumination of Yarish and Panav. First comes the upper hay of the 365 negative commandments, which separates and removes what has already been received, namely to eliminate the brazenness and arrogance, in tagbiyah kanesher, standing at the back of holiness in order to receive. This is accomplished through start tabachim of holiness, and the second mouth from the side of chesed brings the additional inner illumination through the positive mitzvahs. Then automatically they are dispersed. Both are necessary because through positive mitzvahs alone there can still be reception from the side of brazenness, which is the arrogance of the keser of Klippa. This is the meaning of the two hays of the double-edged sword. All of this Yosef accomplished when he descended to Egypt, refining the evil and preparing the ground for the strengthening of the three officers of holiness through the 248 positive mitzvahs and the 365 prohibitions. And for all future generations, within every divine spark, there is the power to do the same through Torah and mitzvahs, through Somila and Asi Taif, meaning not to be drawn after evil through chesed. These are the cravings, the saramashkim of Klippa, and to turn away from the primary evil, which is arrogance, as explained. This is the meaning of Asher Lakachti miyad ha'ameri becharbi. The Klippa of Ameri corresponds to Sara Ifim of Klippa, speech, letters, and inner articulation. In the heart, it is verbalization, and in the mind, it is letters of thought. The reason for this is that the main shattering of the seven kings occurred specifically in the letters, which are the kalim. The lights themselves did not shatter, as is known, as explained elsewhere. The shattering and fragmentation of letters is the mushal for the shattering of vessels. Therefore, the primary clip that includes everything is the letters of the Ameri, simin lishtos milin. In contrast, the many thoughts of holiness expressed through letters of speech and thought in matters of halacha are called lechem, as explained earlier. Atzas Hashem, he's talking, the council of Hashem stands while the thoughts of the nations are nullified. This is because Shema is the refiner, and this takes place specifically through the Chachma of Torah. For refinement happens through Chachma within speech, through halachic decisions saying this is permitted and this is forbidden, as explained elsewhere. Now we can understand Asher Lakachti miyad ha'ameri becharbi ובקשתי, which Uncle translates as B'tzleisi babusi. Bekashti means request, as in Tebayin bayu. And the meaning of the sword has already been explained above, in the idea of the double-edged sword, the two hays. Now we must understand the concept of the bow. The Zohar explains that there are many kinds of weapons, spear, bow, and slingstone. The function of the bow is specifically to kill what is far away. What is close can be killed with a sword or a spear, but something very distant, beyond the reach of the sword, is struck by arrow shot with a bow. This is the mashlas. It says, "V'shalachti es hatzira ad aved gam hanestarim mepanach," because Hashem lekecha b'kirbecha kil gadol b'neir. We must understand why the fact that Hashem is great and awesome explains the destruction of even the hidden enemies. The explanation is that there are two types of klippas. One is evil that a person feels within himself. The other is evil that a person can never feel because it exists in a surrounding concealed state, very hidden and very distant, as explained elsewhere in the pasuk ki berahu. For the evil that is felt, the double-edged sword is effective to kill through Torah and tefillah, as explained above. But for the concealed surrounding evil, the sword is ineffective because it cannot reach it due to the intensity of its concealment and distance. For this, the bow is effective, shooting arrows that reach even the surrounding evil and destroy it. This is the meaning of Adaved Gam and But we must understand from where does the bow derive such power more than the sword? The answer is that we see that the power of the arrow to travel far comes from the pulling of the bowstring. The more one draws the string back with all its strength, the greater the force of the arrow's flight. This is like a stone thrown at a wall. It rebounds according to the strength of the blow, as explained elsewhere. This is the muscle for returning light that comes through impact. So too here, the deeper pull downward, the farther the arrow flies outward. This is the muscle for the destroying the hidden klippas, which are in the surrounding state. Hidden things are only revealed by great light. As we see, a small candle reveals only a small area. A brighter flame reveals more. A large bonfire reveals even great distances. The finer and more hidden things in the space are revealed according to the intensity of the light. So the nimshal is clear. To reveal and destroy the concealed surrounding klippas, which are extremely subtle, requires a very great light. But before small light of holiness, they remain concealed. This is why it says, because the Shem is Kael Gadol V'Neira, meaning a very great light of holiness. Then even the hidden ones are destroyed because they are revealed from concealment by the great light. Now, where does this great light, Kael Gadol, come from? It comes from the bow, from pulling the string back with all one's strength, meaning absolute submission and self-nullification, deep bitterness of the soul. From this bitterness comes a powerful returning light upward, which draws down a great illumination from the 13 attributes of mercy, the source of all encompassing light. All great compassion is drawn specifically through bitterness from below to above. When we say with deep brokenness and humility, this is why the encompassing klippas are nullified. This is the meaning of bekashti, that through my bow I took even the surrounding aspects of the Amiri, which the double-edged sword alone could not remove. This is the meaning of unkelos, is bevusi, supplication with deep bitterness and utter humility, which is the muscle of drawing the bowstring and generating returning light, as explained. Ben Peres Yosef, Ben Peres Aliyayin. We need to understand why it repeats Ben Peres twice. Also, what is meant by Aliyayin? To understand this, we must first introduce the meaning of Yosef Mitzrayim. This follows what is explained in the Kavanas of Pesach and Avodah Mayinu, that we are the children of Zeranpin, and we were slaves to Pare, who draws nourishment from the Eid of Arachanpin in Egypt, Meitzar Yam. V'yetzienu Hashem Elokeinu refers to Chachma and Bina, which clothed the arms of Arachanpin. And Ilu lo yitzianu, had he not taken us out, we would still be enslaved, as explained there. Also, what we say afterwards, Kama Malas Tevis Lamakam Aleinu, these are the 15 levels corresponding to the 15 Yesodis. To understand all this, we must first understand the concept of Arachanpin. It is known that Arachanpin is a middle level between the essence of the Matzil and the emanated beings. In the Sefer Magen David of the Baz, a view is brought that Keser is Ohr in Seif itself. Any dispute it. But in Chaim Hechal Zayin, it is explained that both opinions are true. Keser contains both the final level of Ohr in Seif and also the root of the emanated beings. The explanation is that there is absolutely no comparison between Ohr in Seif and the emanated beings. An emanated light is always a particular, such as the light of Chachma, which does not include the light of Chesed, and so on. This is already division and limitation. But in Ohr in Seif himself, there is no concept at all of division or of wisdom on its own or kindness on its own, because he is absolute simplicity without any defined mode of influence yet. When we speak of the name Havaya with Yudin, the name of Av, which brings forth the light of Chachma, we still do not call the particular sphere itself a likus, even though Ohr in Seif is what brings it into being. Chachma remains a particular. When we call likus, what we call likus is the Ohr in Seif within Chachma, which remains absolute simplicity. The name Havaya of the light of Chachma refers to the Ohr in Seif as it has been contracted to bring Chachma into being. And even after this contraction, it is still Ohr in Seif as before the contraction. Therefore, we call it Elikah, not Chachma. This applies everywhere in Tanakh where the name Elikah is mentioned. It refers to Ohr in Seif within that particular sphere. For example, even if that Havaya is in Keser or Chachma, the intent is not the sphere itself, but the source of that name, which contracts to bring forth that sphere. Because Ein Mikriyetim de Pshutik, since the Torah calls Havaya Elikah, it must be referring to Ohr in Seif himself and not the sphere. The same applies to the name Kael, which is associated with the sphere of Chesed. The verse is not departing from its simple meaning. Kael truly refers to God himself. When we say Kael is Chesed, we mean Ohr in Seif as it shines within Chesed, and so it is with all the spheres. This is the great principle to him, not to his attributes, as explained elsewhere. Now, since there is no comparison between Ohr in Seif, the absolute simplicity, and the expansion of particular lights, there must be a middle level between them that includes both of them, aspects of both. As is known, between any two opposites, connection is only possible through a middle. This middle level is Arachanpin. It contains both illumination from Ohr in Seif himself and also the beginning of the emanation of particular lights into Atzilus. Because of the aspect of essence within Arachanpin, there was not yet any cause for Chachma and Bina to be emanated. This is due to the contraction of Keser preventing its expansion. This comes from the Achirayim of Arachanpin known as Pare. Chachma Bina clothing Arich Anpin means that the light of Keser expanded and descended to be contracted into Chachma and Bina. This came from the level of Yesod of Arachanpin, whose nature is goodness, to bestow, to descend, and to humble itself. This is why we say Kama Malas Tevis, to indicate the level of Yesodis, which are called Tov. In every part of there are three Yesodis. The Yesod of Arachanpin is first. These are the 15 Vavs in Emes V'Yatzev, and this is the core meaning of the Yosef Haydid. And likewise below, in the lowest world, because of Pari, who stands in the Meitzar of Archan of Bria, the elimination of the essence of Atzilus withdrew from the worlds and became deeply concealed within his essence. As a result, the entire contact of the worlds was only through externality and achiraim. Therefore, even in this physical world, Yidden, who are the inner dimension, were enslaved with crushing labor because of the letters and combinations of nature that dominated Egypt and weighed down the world down upon them, leaving everything to run purely according to nature. This is like a person who is deeply absorbed in his own affairs. He leaves the management of his servants to the first superficial logic without paying attention to the inner benefit. In the Nimshal, it is not exactly the same. Everything else is insignificant compared to its essence. This is similar to what the Medrash says on I do not know which one he desires until he separated them, because from the perspective of exaltation, in the essence there is no preference for one over the other. Both are insignificant. The root of this matter in Archanpan of Atzilus is the absence of the expansion of will into Chachma and Bina, as explained elsewhere. But when the will expands into Chachma and Bina, there is room to desire both good deeds and to reject evil. Then Yisrael is remembered, no longer enslaved. As it says, Vayeda, because Chachma and Bina are a contraction of will, so that it does not desire what the intellect does not agree with. But in the essence of will, I do not know which one he desires. Because of this, he will slow to anger even toward the wicked, as Chazal say, to show how long-suffering he is. Now, in truth, in order for there to be an awakening of the descent of the light of the essence into Chachma and Bina, which is a great contraction, only possible through the level of Yisayid, as explained earlier, must first be an elevation of my nukfin to arouse the attribute of Yisayid, and then the attribute of Yisayid itself elevates my nukfin within the essence, so that afterward he draws down from his goodness to bestow to the lowly of spirit. These two kinds of elevation of my nukfin are hinted to in the first verse of Krishma. Shema Yisrael. Shema is the elevation of my nukfin of the nukfa, Shem Ban, the name Ayin. Yisrael is the elevation of my nukfin of Yisayid. Then Hashem Elokeinu, Chachma and Bina, the two companions, draw Moichen into Zeranpin, and Hashem Echad is the descent of the flow from above to below. To explain this more fully, we must first explain the word Shema and the meaning of the large ayin within it. Shema, the name ayin means shash. Shem ayin means that the large ayin refers to the seven lower spheres of Ima, from which the shattering of the seven primordial kings occurred. The large ayin hints to the seven kings of Nikudim of Sag, which are far above Zeynab and Avatzinos. As it says, Lifnei Melach Melech. These kings are from the level of Ban. As it says, V'yamas V'yimlach. Therefore, in the elevation of my Nukfin, we mention the root of Malchus, from which the worlds of Bria, Tir, and Asir emerged, since they all came into being through the shattering. That level is Malchus, as it is known, and with this intention, contemplating how the expansion of the attribute of Malchus relative to its root and Ban of the Nikudim before Atzilus is completely insignificant, since the level of Malchus before Atzilus is exceedingly elevated beyond all contractions, and the fact that it becomes the root and source for created beings of limitation is an enormous descent. And Vayimlech refers to the expansion of the revelation of the will of Atzilus. Through this contemplation, one elevates the attribute of Malchus from its lowliness and contraction back toward its lofty root. The nature of elevation can be understood by analogy. When one praises his student before his teacher, saying that he grasped the teacher's explanation well, even though this is not praise of the student himself, since it is the teacher's wisdom. Nevertheless, this connects the student to his root. Through this, he is elevated before his teacher and can receive additional flow. So too here, by mentioning this large ayin, one elevates the attribute of Malchus back to its root, how Malchus existed before the shattering in the world of Nikudim in a very exalted state within Atzilus. After that, we mentioned the elevation of my nukfin of the mashpia from Shema, which is called Yisrael Yasher Kael, the Moichen of Zeranpin, in its essence as it was before Atzilus. The level of Ma, its root in Nikudim, is above the shattering because only Malchus died there. Therefore, the elevation of Ma from below to above is far greater than the elevation of Malchus in its root. This is the meaning of Yisrael Al Machshava, the Adon Kadmen, Lidraish. To understand this elevation of the mashpia, in essence, we must first introduce the verse regarding Yosef, who was Yisai, the conclusion of the body. Gufa Obris Chashiv Chad. From this we can understand the elevation of Yisrael as well. As it says, Hine Bincha Yosef Ba'elecha, we need to understand why the strengthening of Yisrael and his sitting up is connected specifically to Yosef coming to him. The explanation is analogous to the physical covenant. It is known that there is no arousal without das. The moment one withdraws his mind from focus and deep involvement and ceases to think, the limb becomes limp. We see that there is a real connection and bond between the limb and the brain in the head. This is unlike the other limbs. Well, if a person thinks about desire, his hand or foot does not become aroused in the same way. The reason is known. There are very fine sinews that extend from the brain into the spinal cord, and they are deeply connected to the point that the cord in the limb and the brain become like one. Because of this, arousal happens suddenly, in an instant, without any delay, and the seed that originates in the brain is drawn down through the spinal cord to the limb and gives birth. If there is a weakness in the brain, there will be no birth. And conversely, if there is a weakness in the limb, the brain feels it as well because they are considered like one limb. So whether in the upward arousal, which is the firmness that awakens the spiritual and physical drop, or in the downward drawing of the drop, they are considered as one. From all this we can understand the spiritual analog. Since Yosef is the level of Yesod, the conclusion of the body, Tzadik Chai Olam, he is the aspect of connection. And there are two levels within this connection. The first is from below to above. He binds himself upward to that which is above him, like the firmness mentioned above. The second is the descent of flow from above through him. He binds himself to the receiver in order to bestow, like a physical emission of seed. This is the meaning of Hine bincha Yosef boilacha. Yosef came to you, meaning that Yosef ascended in the aspect of elevation and connection from below to above. Immediately afterward, Yisrael was strengthened. Even the head and mechan of the body, which are called Yisrael, were strengthened through the arousal of spiritual flow within the intellectual grasp of the midas of Atzilus, which are the illuminations of Abba and Ima called Tipas Abba, as explained elsewhere, like the spiritual drop in the brain that comes from the faculty of the masculine. The reason Yisrael was strengthened is because Gufa, the body, and the covenant are considered one, as explained in the muscle. This is also the meaning of a Yasser Yosef Makavte Likras Yisrael Aviv, as explained elsewhere. From this, we can understand the ascent of Yisrael upward, even beyond himself, into the essence, the level of yichida of the soul, from which the masculine draws the spiritual delight contained in Tipas Abba, and so on, as explained in detail in the Kavanahs to the two words Shema Yisrael. This is the meaning of Ben Peres Yosef Ben Peres. The repetition hints to the two types of connection mentioned above. For Peres means fruitfulness and multiplication. It explains why Yosef is Ben Peres, abundant in the multiplication of physical seed, bringing forth from nothingness to existence souls and angels, as is known. This corresponds to the connection from above to below. This is because he is Ben Peres Ali Ayin. That is because he greatly deepened the connection from below to above to a very lofty level in the essence. Ali Ayin means above the large Ayin mentioned earlier. His elevation of Miyn reached that level. And the higher the place to which the elevation reaches, the more the flow can be drawn down from above to below without limit or end. For the measure of drawing down masculine waters corresponds to the measure of the elevation of feminine waters. This can be understood from the soul of tzaddikim below. We see many different levels of cleaving to the living God. There are tzaddikim whose cleaving is through absolute stripping away of physicality with complete and genuine self-sacrifice, and there are tzaddikim who do not possess such overt self-sacrifice, yet they are far more exalted than the former with no comparison at all. Because of the self-sacrifice of one comes only a small illumination, while from the self-sacrifice of the other comes a very great illumination in Atzilus. This is like the distinction between Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai and Rabbi Chanina ben Dosa. One like a servant, the other like a minister. The explanation is that even though the self-sacrifice of the former may be more outwardly intense, like the root of his soul, and his grasp does not reach such a high place as the soul of the latter, one being from Chesed of Malchus of Atzilus, and the other from Chachma and the like. Therefore, the small awakening of a Chachma cannot be elicited by even a tenth of the self-sacrifice from one whose root is lower, since there is no comparison between the higher intellectual levels and the emotional levels of Malchus. However, if the self-sacrifice of the one rooted in Chachma is also deeper and more genuine than the self-sacrifice of the one rooted in Chesed, then there is no comparison at all. For the arousal above, whether greater or lesser, depends on the nature of the self-sacrifice below, on how deep it is. And if that too is present, then the arousal above has two advantages. First, it reaches the highest place, and second, it comes with additional illumination. This is like depth and height. When there is no limit to height, there is also no limit to depth. From all this, we can understand the difference between Yosef and the Shvatim, both below and above, in these two respects. The divine comprehension of Yosef's soul reached an extraordinary exalted level in Atzilus, and his self-sacrifice in the depth of the heart was bound up in a wondrous cleaving. Therefore, the arousal that reached above was likewise of the highest elevation, unlike the Shvatim, whose arousal did not reach such depth or such height, since they were from the revealed world, whereas Yosef was from the masculine inner world. This is the meaning of Ben Peres Ali Ayin. He reached the depth of the heart in his elevation of Miyn to the most exalted place above the large Ayin. Therefore, he is Ben Peres, abundant in revealed additional illumination. For additional illumination only comes as a result of first elevating Miyn to the highest place through wondrous cleaving. The Shvatim, however, elevated Miyn only up to the level of the large Ayin. This is like one who shoots an arrow upward. The more he draws it downward, the higher it flies upward. This is the deeper one descends below, the higher one rises above, and the higher one rises, the deeper the descent of the arrow afterwards. So too the reason the flow descends downward without limit, as in Ben Peres, is because he was Ben Peres Ali Ayin, as explained.